The massive doors of Nexus Prime's Judgment Hall groaned open, their ancient mechanisms struggling against centuries of use. The sound echoed through corridors that had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen galactic civilizations. Today, they would hear testimony that would shake the very foundations of interstellar warfare. Vexstar limped forward, each step a painful reminder of battles that should never have been lost. His chitinous armor, once the proud midnight black of the 47th Galactic Strike Legion, now bore the scars of plasma burns and projectile impacts. The ceremonial battle ribbons that once adorned his shoulder guards hung in tatters, silent witnesses to campaigns that had ended in ways no military academy could have predicted. The witness stand seemed impossibly far away, as every eye in the chamber tracked his movement. 12 different species sat in judgment, their varied forms creating a living museum of galactic evolution. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed softly with each of his footsteps. The gas-based nebulans swirled in their containment suits there, emotions visible as color changes in their ethereal forms. The massive stone-like granite lords sat motionless, their ancient eyes fixed on the broken warrior approaching them. Behind them, in the observer galleries, representatives from hundreds of worlds whispered among themselves. The human question had become the most pressing issue facing the Galactic Council. 3 months ago, Earth had been classified as a minor primitive world, suitable only for resource extraction. Now entire fleets refused assignments to human-occupied systems. Vexstar's arms shook as he placed his primary hands on the testimony. Crystal, an ancient artifact that would record not just his words, but his emotional state and physiological responses. Lying would be impossible, which made his presence here all the more remarkable. Few commanders would willingly submit to such scrutiny after leading their forces to complete defeat. High Arbiter. Moldak raised her serpentine head, her scales shifting from deep blue to authoritative purple. Her species, the Nagavarians, of Serpentis Prime, had served as mediators for over 3,000 years. Her voice carried the weight of countless verdicts, each word precisely chosen. "State your name and rank for the record," she commanded, her forked tongue tasting the air for deception. Vexstar's breathing apparatus wheezed as he drew air through damaged lung chambers. When he spoke, his voice carried the rough rasp of a warrior who had inhaled too much smoke from too many burning battlefields. Vexstar, former battle commander of the 47th Galactic Strike Legion, 3rd Division, Assault Corps. He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. "I am here to testify about the humans." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several of the Zephyrian delegates chimed in discord, their crystalline forms resonating with frequency patterns that translated to deep unease. The nebular representative's gaseous form shifted through rapid color changes, cycling from curious yellow to fearful red. Even the stoic granite lords showed reaction, their stone features shifting slightly in what passed for surprise among their kind. In the observer galleries, the whispers grew louder. The human uprising had indeed been the talk of the galaxy, but most of the stories were dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. Here was the first direct testimony from someone who had actually faced Earth's warriors in combat. Arbiter Gextol, his insectoid form twitching with anticipation, leaned forward on his multiple legs. His species, the hive minds of Kepler-7, prized tactical information above all else. "Tell us about your first encounter with these humans, Commander." Vexstar's compound eyes darkened as he accessed memories he had tried desperately to forget. Each recollection brought with it phantom pains from wounds that had healed in body, but not in mind. It was 3 standard months ago on Kepler 44-B. Command designated it Operation Swiftclaw. Intelligence reports indicated a minor human mining colony, approximately 200 civilians with minimal defensive capabilities. He shifted his weight, old injuries protesting the movement. Our information was thorough, or so we believed. Humans were described as bipedal, carbon-based life, forms with limited physical capabilities. No natural armor, no redundant organ systems, no enhanced sensory arrays. Their technology was classified as primitive projectile weapons and basic chemical propulsion systems. The testimony crystal pulsed with a steady blue light, confirming the truth of his statements. My legion numbered 2,000 warriors at full strength. We had atmospheric fighters, orbital bombardment capabilities, and enough firepower to level a small moon. The mission parameters called for a 6-hour operation. Secure the mining equipment, eliminate resistance, establish a forward base. Vexstar's mandibles scraped against each other, producing a sound like grinding metal. We made play netfall at local dawn. The human settlement spread across a valley floor, completely exposed to aerial observation. Simple prefabricated structures. No visible defensive installations, no energy shields or weapon emplacements. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a civilian mining operation. The Arbiter Moldak's tail coiled with interest. What was your tactical assessment? Textbook suppression scenario. Deploy in standard formation, demand surrender, secure objectives. I remember thinking this would be good training for the newer recruits, a chance to experience combat without significant risk. Vexstar's voice took on a haunted quality. Then we heard something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. As our assault craft ascended toward the settlement, music began drifting up from below. Not alarm signals or evacuation orders, but actual music. The humans were singing. The chamber fell silent except for the soft chiming of confused Zephyrians. Who sings before battle, Vexstar? Asked the assembly. What species faces overwhelming military force with music? We assumed it was some primitive religious ritual, perhaps an attempt to appease what they saw as superior beings. His compound eyes focused on something beyond the chamber walls. The first human I saw clearly was standing in the exact center of their compound. Male, approximately 1.8 meters in height, unremarkable by any galactic standard. The intelligence. Files had designated him as Deho, a maintenance technician responsible for mining equipment repair. Vexter's voice dropped barely above a whisper, but held a single weapon. What human military doctrine calls a rifle, simple metal tube, that propels small projectiles using chemical explosions. Compared to our plasma cannons, it was laughably primitive. But when our heavy weapons powered up, when the whine of charging energy cells echoed across the valley, this Deho did something unprecedented. The battle commander paused, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly, smiled. The tribunal chambers. Atmosphere grew thick with tension as Vexstar's scarred carapace caught the shifting lights from above. His forearms moved restlessly, phantom pains from old wounds making him wince with each gesture. The memory crystals embedded in the witness stand pulsed brighter, responding to the intensity of emotions flowing through his testimony. Command. Was not pleased with our performance on Kepler-4 for to be. Vexstar continued, his voice carrying the weight of military shame that transcended species barriers. Losing half a legion to what they still classified as primitives was considered an embarrassment to Vorsan military doctrine. High Command needed a victory to restore confidence in our forces. The Granite Lord Arbiter Kethstone rumbled with curiosity. His massive form shifted with sounds like grinding mountains. What was your next assignment, Commander? Station Omega, a remote supply depot in the Outer Rim, supposedly occupied by human refugees from our previous engagements. Reported minimal defensive capabilities, limited food stores, and no military personnel. Vexstar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. 47 humans against our remaining 1,000 warriors. Command called it a morale restoration exercise. Arbiter Moldak's serpentine form coiled with renewed interest. 42-1 odds in your favor. Surely this engagement proceeded. According to doctrine, Vexstar's compound eyes dimmed as he accessed the painful memories. The station sat in the shadow of a dead moon, a cylindrical structure roughly 800 meters long. Standard civilian cargo hauler design, converted for supply operations. No weapon hardpoints, no shield generators, no defensive systems that our sensors could detect. He paused, his breathing apparatus wheezing as damaged lung chambers struggled. With the recycled air, we established a perimeter at optimal bombardment range. Standard siege protocols dictated a demand for surrender, followed by overwhelming force if refused. But Command had specific orders. The station's cargo holds contained rare minerals needed for the war effort. We had to take it intact. The crystalline. Zephyrian delegate Zilmathis chimed a question that resonated through the chamber. What was the human response to your surrender demand? They responded with a transmission that still confuses our linguistic specialists. A human male, identifying himself as J1, simply said, "Come and take it." 3 words that somehow carried more defiance than any military threat we had encountered. Shifted his weight, old injuries protesting the movement. The siege began on day 1 of the 4th lunar cycle. We positioned heavy weapons at all approach vectors, established orbital overwatch, and began standard suppression bombardment of non-essential systems. The humans should have been cut off from all outside communication and supply. His voice took on an edge of grudging respect. Within 72 hours, everything changed. The station's external appearance remained the same, but something fundamental had shifted. Hull plating that had been purely structural was repositioned to create interlocking defensive positions. Cargo bay doors were modified into weapon ports. The entire docking array was reconfigured into a maze of overlapping kill zones. The nebular representative's gaseous form shifted through concerned color patterns. Deep purple clouds swirling within his containment suit. But the real transformation was invisible to our sensors. A female human, designated Sora in our intelligence files, had somehow gained access to our communication networks. At first, we thought it was simple signal interception. Every military force expects some level of enemy intelligence gathering. Vextor's mandibles ground together, producing a sound like breaking ceramic. Then, the psychological warfare began. During our rest cycles, when Vorthan warriors enter regenerative states, the station's external speakers would activate. At first, it was just noise static and random frequencies. Our technical specialists assured me it was equipment malfunction. Damaged systems cycling through their programs. The battle commander's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. On night 7, we realized the truth. The sounds weren't random. They were recordings of Vorthan. Larvae in distress? The crying of our young ones, somehow captured and modified to achieve maximum psychological impact. How had these humans learned what our children sounded like? How had they acquired such recordings? Several tribunal members shifted uncomfortably, their various forms expressing universal parental concern. Sleep became impossible. The sounds triggered every protective instinct our species had evolved over millions of years. Warriors who had faced plasma fire without flinching began showing signs of severe stress. My medical staff reported increasing cases of anxiety disorders and combat fatigue. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like dark mirrors. But Sora's greatest achievement was deciphering our pheromone communication system. Vorthon military doctrine relies heavily on chemical signals for coordination. Complex battle formations, tactical adjustments, emergency protocols, all transmitted through scent markers that had been considered impossible for alien species to replicate. The insectoid arbiter Gexto clicked his mandibles in disbelief. Chemical communication is species-specific. The molecular structures required for pheromone transmission cannot be artificially reproduced without decades of biological study. That's what we believed, Vextar replied, his voice hollow with remembered shock, till my own warriors began questioning direct orders. Fall back to defensive position 7, they claimed a smell in the air. Weapons malfunction detected in Sector 12, their antennae insisted. Commander Vextar orders immediate tactical withdrawal to secondary positions. The testimony crystal pulsed with irregular patterns, reflecting the emotional chaos of the memories. The humans had turned our own communication system against us. Orders I never gave were being transmitted through modified atmospheric processors. My command structure began fragmenting as warriors followed conflicting instructions that their own senses confirmed as genuine. Vextar paused, his forearms trembling slightly. On day 43, the station began launching projectiles at our positions. Our defensive systems prepared for explosive impacts, energy weapons, standard military ordnance. Instead, the projectiles contained sound recordings, Vorthan death songs, the ceremonial music our species performs during funeral. Rights played at frequencies specifically calibrated to resonate with our inner ear chambers. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of environmental systems. 3 of my sub-commanders entered catatonic states within hours. The death songs triggered deep psychological responses, forcing them to confront their own mortality in ways that broke their ability to function. 2 others requested immediate transfer to different star systems, claiming they could no longer serve effectively in combat roles. Arbiter Kelmouth, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber. Lights posed the question that hung in everyone's thoughts. How did the siege conclude, Commander? Vextar's voice carried a note of military shame that transcended species barriers. It didn't conclude. We withdrew. 1,000 elite Vorthan warriors equipped with the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, defeated by 47 humans who never fired a single direct shot at our forces. The tribunal erupted in shocked vocalizations, chittering, chiming, and rumbling that created a cacophony of disbelief. In the final week, they began singing again. But these weren't the simple melodies we had heard during our first encounter. These were human war songs, modified and adapted to exploit specific vulnerabilities in Vorthon auditory processing. They had somehow learned our acoustic ranges and created frequencies designed to cause maximum psychological discomfort. Vextar. Breathing apparatus cycled rapidly, struggling with the emotional intensity of the memories. Sleep became impossible. Food lost its taste as our digestive systems shut down in response to constant stress. My warriors reported seeing movement in empty corridors, shadows that weren't there, phantom sounds that had no source. The station had become a psychological weapon, and we were its targets. The battle commander looked directly at each arbiter. In turn, when I finally gave the order to withdraw, admitting defeat to an enemy that had never engaged us in direct combat, I swear I heard something that will haunt me for the rest of my cycles. Laughter. Human laughter, echoing from station. Omega speakers. Not cruel or mocking, but the sound of people who had found joy in an impossible situation. The chamber remained silent for several minutes, the weight of his testimony settling over the assembled delegates like a heavy shroud. That laughter taught me something about humans that no intelligence report had ever mentioned. They don't just fight to win. They fight because they enjoy the challenge of turning hopeless situations into victories. And that makes them the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever encountered. The recess had lasted only 20 minutes, but Vextar looked as though he had aged cycles during the break. When he returned to the witness stand, his 4 arms moved with the careful precision of someone trying to control tremors that ran deeper than mere physical damage. The tribunal members had used the time to consult their databases, cross-referencing reports from Sylvana 7 that had been classified as equipment malfunction and atmospheric interference. High Command's patience with the 47th Legion had reached its breaking point, Vextar began, his voice carrying the weight of military disgrace that transcended species. 2 failures against what they still classified as primitive humans had damaged our reputation across the entire galactic fleet. They needed a decisive victory to restore confidence in Vorthon military capabilities. Arbiter Moldaka's serpentine form shifted, her scales cycling through colors that indicated deep interest mixed with growing concern.
What were your new orders, Commander?
Sylvana 7? A jungle moon in the Kepler system? Long-range scans had detected a small human research facility, approximately 12 scientific personnel studying the moon's ecosystem. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter irony. Command called it a redemption mission. Simple extraction, minimal resistance expected. The crystalline Zephyrian delegate chimed softly, harmonics that translated to curiosity about environmental factors. What were the tactical conditions on this moon? Vextar's compound eyes brightened slightly, the first sign of confidence he had shown during his testimony. Perfect hunting conditions for Vorthan forces. Dense jungle canopy, high humidity, multiple predator species, creating natural camouflage for our thermal signatures. Our echolocation systems could map terrain through the thickest vegetation. Our pheromone tracking could follow scent trails for days. Our natural armor provided protection against thorns, toxic plants, and native wildlife. He paused, his breathing. Apparatus cycling as he accessed memories that still caused phantom pain. I remember thinking this would finally be the victory we needed. 800 warriors against 12 scientists in an environment where we held every possible advantage. My tactical officers estimated a mission duration of 6 hours maximum. The Granite Lord Arbiter rumbled with what passed for encouragement. Among his species? Proceed with your account, Commander. We made planet fall at local dawn, expecting to find the humans barricaded in their research station, possibly calling for evacuation. Equipment still running, meals half finished, personal belongings scattered as if the occupants had fled in panic. Vexstar's voice took on a haunted quality.
Oh.
Blood trails led from the station into the jungle. Not arterial spray or combat wounds, but drops and smears that suggested injured personnel moving slowly through the undergrowth. My medical specialist confirmed the samples as human, approximately 6 hours old. Everything indicated wounded scientists attempting to escape deeper into the forest. The battle commander's forearms moved restlessly, old scars visible through gaps in his damaged armor. I divided my force into 40 hunting packs of 20 warriors each. Each pack had communication equipment, medical supplies, and strict orders to take prisoners for interrogation. The first pack to go silent was led by Sub-Commander Grixtel, one of my most experienced jungle warfare specialists. His final transmission reported contact with human tracks near a stream, approximately 2 kilometers from the research station. Then nothing. Complete communication blackout. Arbiter Gextol leaned forward on his multiple legs, his insectoid form twitching with tactical interest. Equipment malfunction? That's what we assumed? Jungle environments can interfere with. Communication systems and Sylvana 7 had unusual electromagnetic properties. I dispatched a second pack to investigate while continuing the search pattern with the remaining forces. Vexstar's breathing apparatus wheezed as damaged lung chambers struggled with. Pack 6 hours later, in a small clearing beside a waterfall, all 20 warriors were unconscious but completely unharmed. Their weapons had been carefully arranged in a perfect circle around them. Power cells removed and placed in neat stacks. Nearby, no signs of struggle, no evidence of combat, no trace of human presence. The tribunal members exchanged glances across species barriers, universal expressions of confusion and concern. My medical team confirmed they were in deep sleep states. Vital signs normal, but unresponsive to standard revival techniques. It took 18 hours for them to regain consciousness, and when they did, none of them remembered anything after entering the clearing. Vexstar shifted his weight, phantom, pains making him wince. The second pack reported visual contact with a lone human male, approximately 30 years old by their aging standards, carrying nothing but basic survival tools. An alien plant life. One human, no weapons, no backup, moving slowly through dense jungle. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 20 elite Vorthan warriors pursued a single unarmed scientist. They had thermal imaging, motion sensors, chemical trackers, and enough firepower to level a small building. By every tactical calculation, the engagement should have lasted minutes. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of environmental systems. We found them the next morning, arranged in the same formation as the first pack. Unconscious, unharmed, weapons neatly stacked, no memory of what had occurred. Their equipment had been systematically disabled, not destroyed. Every device carefully opened, specific components removed or rearranged to render them non-functional. Arbiter Kelmos' metallic form reflected the chamber's lights as he posed the obvious question. What components were taken? Communication, circuits, targeting systems, power regulation modules. Nothing that could be used as weapons or explosives, but everything necessary for coordination and tactical advantage. Someone with detailed knowledge of Vorthan military technology had performed precise surgical strikes on our equipment. Vexstar's compound eyes dimmed as he accessed the most painful memories. It was the third pack that broke our morale completely. Led by Yexmore, my most experienced tracker, a warrior who had hunted dangerous prey on 50 different worlds. His pack was investigating unusual movement patterns in the northern quadrant when they transmitted an emergency signal. The battle commander's voice cracked slightly. Yexmore's final transmission was barely coherent. He was screaming that the trees were moving, that the jungle itself had turned against them. He claimed a human female was somehow communicating with the native wildlife, using the forest's predators as extensions of her own senses. The nebula representative's gaseous form shifted through rapid color changes, deep red clouds swirling. Within his containment suit, we dismissed it as combat stress or atmospheric hallucinations. Jungle environments can produce psychological effects, especially in prolonged operations. But when we reached their last known position, we found something that challenged everything we understood about interspecies interaction. Vexstar paused, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. 20 elite warriors sitting in perfect meditation positions in a circular clearing. They remained in those positions for 3 days, refusing food, water, or medical attention. When Yexmore finally spoke, his words changed everything. To the research station files had somehow established communication with the local ecosystem. Not just individual animals, but the entire food web. Predators that should have been fighting each other were working together. Plants were providing information about our movements. The jungle itself had become a living intelligence network. Arbiter. Gextol clicked his mandibles in disbelief. Impossible. No species can establish neural connections with alien ecosystems in such a short time frame. That's exactly what I thought, Vexstar replied, his voice hollow with remembered shock. Until I experienced it myself during the final sweep. When the real attacks began, his forearms trembled as phantom pains coursed through old wounds. Not attacks, hunts. We were being stalked by predators who moved with perfect knowledge of our capabilities and limitations. Pitfall traps disguised with native vegetation that collapsed under exactly the weight of Vorthan armor. Projectile launchers rigged to motion sensors calibrated for our movement patterns. That seemed to lead toward the humans, but actually guided us deeper into carefully prepared killing zones. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy with tension as every delegate leaned forward. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the traps or the tactical sophistication. It was the complete absence of human presence. They had somehow learned to become invisible to every detection system we possessed. Vexstar's voice dropped to barely a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. We were being hunted by ghosts, humans who had transformed from helpless scientists into apex predators in less than a week. And the worst part was knowing they were watching us, studying us. The battle commander looked directly at each arbiter in turn. That's when I realized the truth about humans. They don't just adapt to new environments. They become the environment. Once they do, everything else becomes their prey. The weight of 3 consecutive defeats hung over Vexstar like a dark shroud as he prepared to recount the final chapter of his military career. His scarred carapace caught the shifting lights of the tribunal chamber, each mark a testament to battles that had shattered everything he thought he knew about warfare. The remaining delegates had grown silent, their various forms leaning forward in anticipation of testimony that would challenge the very foundations of galactic military doctrine. 47th Galactic Strike Legion had been reduced to 300. Warriors, Vexstar began, his voice carrying the hollow tone of a commander who had watched his forces dwindle against an enemy that shouldn't have existed. 300 survivors from an original force of 2,000, all bearing psychological scars that our medical teams couldn't begin to understand. His mandibles clicked in the rhythmic pattern that had become his nervous habit, a sound like breaking ceramic that echoed through the chamber's crystal walls. High Command classified us as battle-compromised, a polite military term for units that had lost their effectiveness through repeated exposure to traumatic combat situations. Standard protocol would have been immediate rotation to rear duties, months of psychological rehabilitation, and eventual discharge from active service. 2 deeper shades of blue that indicated focused attention. But that didn't happen. Command needed a victory, any victory, to restore confidence in Vorthon military capabilities. The previous engagements had become classified information, but rumors were spreading throughout the fleet. Stories of humans who fought like demons, who turned defeat into victory through methods that defied military logic. Vexstar's compound eyes darkened as he accessed memories that still caused phantom pain. Throughout his damaged nervous system, They assigned us to what they called a humanitarian mission. The crystalline caverns of Veganine, a mining operation that had suffered a catastrophic collapse. Intelligence reports indicated 32 human miners trapped in the lower levels. Cut off from surface communication, running low on supplies and oxygen, the battle commander's forearms moved restlessly, old wounds protesting as emotional stress triggered sympathetic pain responses. It was presented as a rescue operation, a chance for the 47th Legion to restore its reputation through an act of mercy rather than conquest. Simple extraction protocols, minimal resistance expected, clear moral objectives that would help heal the psychological damage from our previous encounters. Arbiter Gextel's insectoid form twitched with tactical curiosity. What were the operational parameters? Standard cave fighting doctrine. Sealed environment, limited maneuverability, complete control of entry and exit points. Our thermal imaging would be useless in the mineral-rich caverns. But our echolocation systems would provide perfect three-dimensional mapping. Plasma weapons would be limited to avoid structural damage, but projectile weapons would be highly effective in enclosed spaces. Vextar paused, his breathing apparatus cycling as he prepared to relive the most traumatic memories of his military career. We descended through the main shaft at local dawn, expecting to find desperate humans huddled around failing life support systems, grateful for rescue by any species. Instead, we discovered that the mining accident had occurred exactly 3 weeks and 4 days earlier. 3 weeks that the humans had used for purposes our intelligence analysts never considered. The testimony crystal pulsed with irregular patterns responding to the emotional intensity of memories that had been carefully suppressed for months. The cavern system was vast, a network of natural chambers connected by tunnels that had been carved by centuries of mining operations. Crystalline formations covered every surface, creating a landscape that seemed alien even to species accustomed to diverse planetary environments, but something about the arrangement felt wrong, deliberate rather than natural. Vextar's voice took on the tone of grudging professional respect. Their leader was a man named Tejon, identified in mining records. As a geological engineer with expertise in mineral extraction and cave systems, his second in command was Yuri, communications specialist who had somehow maintained contact with the outside world despite the supposed isolation of their position. The battle commander's mandibles scraped against each other, producing sounds that carried undertones of remembered fear. When we reached the central chamber, we found them waiting, not hiding, not cowering, not pleading for rescue. Waiting. 32 humans, arranged in defensive positions that shouldn't have been possible, given their supposed civilian status and limited resources. Arbiter Kelmuth's metallic form reflected the chamber's lights as he posed the obvious question. What was your tactical assessment? By every military calculation, the engagement should have lasted minutes. 300 elite Vorthan warriors, armed with advanced plasma weapons and protected by combat armor, against 32 civilian miners equipped with basic tools and improvised defenses. The mathematical certainty of victory was so overwhelming that I considered offering surrender terms to avoid unnecessary casualties. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like dark mirrors. But I had learned enough about humans to recognize something in their positioning. It's their expressions, their apparent calm in the face of impossible odds. They weren't preparing to surrender. They were preparing to fight, and they believed they could win. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems and the barely audible chiming of crystalline delegates, processing information that challenged their understanding of tactical probability. The battle began with standard suppression fire, plasma bursts designed to disable rather than kill. Our orders were clear. These were rescued civilians, not enemy combatants. But the humans' response was unlike anything in our tactical databases. Vextar's voice cracked slightly as he continued. They didn't scatter or seek cover like untrained civilians would. They didn't return fire with the desperate inaccuracy of panicked amateurs. Instead, they began coordinating a defense that showed professional military training and intimate knowledge of the cavern's unique properties. His forearms trembled as phantom pains coursed through old wounds, A female named Biora, listed in mining records as a safety inspector, continued coordinating defensive positions while bleeding from 3 plasma wounds that should have incapacitated her immediately. Male called Dongmin, supposedly a heavy. The equipment operator used his own body as a human shield to protect what appeared to be acoustic monitoring equipment. The tribunal members leaned forward as one, their varied forms expressing universal fascination with tactical developments that defied conventional military logic. That's when I realized the humans hadn't been trapped by accident. They had been preparing. The crystalline formations throughout the cavern system had been carefully mapped, analyzed, and modified to create specific acoustic properties. Every surface had been tuned to amplify and focus sound waves at frequencies that would interact with Vorthon equipment and physiology. Vextar's breathing apparatus wheezed as damaged lung chambers struggled with the emotional intensity of the memories. Then they began to sing. Not the war songs we had heard before. Not the psychological warfare of Station Omega, but something entirely new. A harmonic frequency that seemed to emerge from the cavern walls themselves, growing stronger with each passing moment until it became a physical force that shook the very foundations of the underground complex. The battle commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Our equipment began failing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Plasma weapons overheated and shut down automatically to prevent explosive failure. Communication arrays produced nothing but static and feedback. The crystalline walls began resonating with frequencies that made our armor vibrate so violently that several warriors collapsed from inner ear damage and disorientation. Vexter looked directly at each arbiter in turn. But the humans' primitive projectile weapons, simple metal tubes that used chemical explosions to propel small pieces of metal, remained completely functional. As we stumbled blind and deaf through the acoustic chaos they had created, they picked us off with surgical precision. Each shot carefully aimed to disable rather than kill. The testimony crystal pulsed with chaotic patterns that reflected the emotional turmoil of memories that had been carefully suppressed. What made it truly impossible to comprehend was their chain of command. When Teijin fell to plasma fire, Yuri assumed leadership without a moment's hesitation. When she was wounded, an engineer named Junho stepped up to coordinate the defense. They had contingency leaders for their contingency leaders, backup plans for their backup plans. Vextar's voice broke completely as he reached the climax of his testimony. I was the only survivor of 300 elite warriors. I found myself in the deepest chamber of the complex, barely conscious, surrounded by the bodies of my comrades. That's when a human medic named Yunjae appeared, carrying medical supplies and moving with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to treating battlefield injuries. The chamber remained silent as the implications of his words sank in. She treated my wounds while the battle still raged in the chambers above us. As she worked, she explained something that changed my understanding of human motivation forever. They weren't fighting to win this particular engagement. They were fighting to ensure that their children would never have to face the same war. Vextar's compound eyes dimmed as he accessed the final, most crucial memory. That's when I understood the fundamental difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy. We fight for victory, for territory, for resources, for dominance. Humans fight for hope. And hope is far more dangerous than any weapon we've ever encountered. The weight of 4 devastating defeats hung in the air like a toxic cloud as Vextar prepared to deliver his final testimony. The tribunal chamber had grown eerily quiet, with even the usually restless nebular delegates maintaining perfect stillness. Within their containment suits, every eye, sensor, and detection organ in the room focused on the scarred Vorthan commander as he gathered strength for words that would reshape galactic military doctrine forever. His compound eyes swept across the assembled delegates, taking in forms that represented millions of years of evolutionary diversity. The serpentine Moldak with her hypnotic scale patterns, the crystalline Zephyrians whose bodies chimed with harmonic frequencies. The massive granite lords who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, and dozens of other species that had somehow found common ground in their shared fear of humanity. Honored arbiters, Vextar began, his voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there at the start of his testimony. You summoned me here to provide intelligence about human military capabilities. You wanted threat assessments, tactical analysis, recommendations for future engagements. But after 4 encounters that cost me everything I believed about warfare, must tell you that you're asking the wrong questions. Arbiter Moldak's tail coiled with barely contained impatience, her scales shifting to aggressive orange patterns. Commander, please focus on the tactical implications of your encounters. The tribunal requires actionable intelligence. Mandibles clicked with what might have been bitter amusement. Actionable intelligence assumes that humans can be understood through conventional military analysis.
Oh.
Every species in this chamber fights for reasons that make logical sense. A territory that provides resources, resources that ensure survival, survival that leads to expansion, expansion that brings dominance. These are patterns we can predict, negotiate with, understand. His forearms moved in gestures that emphasized each point, old wounds protesting the movement but unable to stop the flow of crucial information. Humans fight for concepts that have no physical existence. During my recovery, while Vorthon Medical, teams tried to repair damage that went far deeper than mere physical trauma. I studied human culture through their own historical records. The medic Yoongi who saved my life spent hours explaining their motivations. The testimony crystal pulsed, with steady blue light, confirming every word as absolute truth filtered through a mind that had been forever changed by impossible experiences. They use words like freedom, justice, self-determination, human dignity. Try to quantify freedom, arbiters. Attempt to place a monetary value on justice. These concepts cannot be traded, cannot be negotiated away, cannot be compromised through diplomatic channels. How do you defeat an enemy who fights for ideas that exist only in their minds but drive them to actions that defy physical reality? The crystalline arbiter Zilmathes chimed a complex harmonic pattern that translated roughly to skeptical inquiry. Surely material losses would eventually force any species to accept realistic limitations. No ideology can overcome mathematical impossibility. Vexter's compound eyes darkened as he accessed memories that still triggered involuntary stress responses throughout his nervous system. That assumption reveals the fundamental misunderstanding that led to our defeats. Humans calculate acceptable losses using formulas that no other species has ever developed. His voice took on the tone of someone describing phenomena that challenged the basic laws of physics. In the crystalline caverns, while plasma fire turned the air itself into a weapon that should have killed everything in its path, I watched. A human named Songwoo crawl across razor-sharp crystal formations with both legs shattered by explosive impacts. He was delivering ammunition to his comrades, moving through a space where every breath meant inhaling superheated particles that were burning his lungs from the inside. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Struggling to process the emotional intensity radiating from the witness stand, he died with a smile on his face, because his sacrifice might allow 3 other humans to continue fighting for 30 more seconds. 30 seconds that could mean the difference between defeat and victory for people he had never met. In a war that had already cost him everything he had ever cared about. Vextar stood slowly, his scarred carapace catching the shifting lights. From above, as his forearms spread wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire assembled tribunal. But here's the revelation that should terrify every species represented in this chamber. Everything I have described, every impossible victory, every tactical nightmare that violated the basic principles of military science, occurred while the humans were deliberately restraining themselves. The tribunal erupted in shocked vocalizations. That created a cacophony of disbelief across multiple communication methods. Chittering, chiming, rumbling, and color changes that expressed universal incredulity at implications that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. The medic Yoonji explained their rules of engagement during the long hours she spent treating wounds that should have been fatal. He called them Geneva Conventions, elaborate moral frameworks that restrict how they conduct warfare even when their own survival is at stake. Vextar's voice carried genuine awe mixed with existential terror. They could have deployed biological weapons on Sylvana 7. My medical team confirmed they had. Collected DNA samples from wounded Vorthan warriors, enough genetic material to engineer pathogens that would have killed every member of my species. Within days, they could have targeted civilian populations, used chemical weapons, employed psychological warfare, sophisticated enough to drive entire planets insane. The battle commander's mandibles scraped against each other, producing sounds like breaking glass that emphasized the weight of his revelation. But their conscience forbade such actions. They fought with self-imposed limitations that would have been considered suicidal by any rational military doctrine. And despite crippling themselves with moral restrictions that no other species would, except they still achieved total victory in every engagement. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like dark mirrors as he prepared to deliver the most crucial intelligence of his testimony. The human expansion into galactic space wasn't conquest disguised as exploration. It was inoculation, a deliberate demonstration designed to teach every species in the galaxy a simple lesson. Humans are too costly to threaten. Every battle my forces fought was actually a classroom where they taught us that leaving humanity alone was the only rational choice. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. I have seen the future of galactic warfare, and it fills me with terror, not because humans will conquer us, but because they will inspire us. Other species are already studying human tactics, adopting their psychological methods, learning to disregard impossible odds the same way humans do. We thought we were fighting primitive savages. Instead, we were students attending a master class taught by professors we were too arrogant to recognize. The testimony crystal blazed with light. That reflected the emotional intensity of memories that had fundamentally altered a warrior's understanding of what war could become. My final warning to this tribunal: never give humans a reason to remove their self-imposed restrictions.
Gas.
Because if they ever decide that their survival requires the complete destruction of another species, nothing in this galaxy will possess the power to stop them. Vextar looked directly at each arbiter in turn, his gaze carrying the weight of someone who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. The most dangerous thing about humans isn't their technology, their tactics, or their refusal to acknowledge defeat. It's that they make you want to become better than you are. They fight wars so brutal that their enemies become pacifists. They show mercy so profound that it transforms hatred into respect. But the battle commander paused, his breathing apparatus cycling as he prepared to voice thoughts that had formed during months of painful recovery. I came here to warn you about the human threat. Instead, I find myself hoping that humanity will accept us as allies rather than subjects. Because after facing them in battle, I understand which side of that choice leads to survival and which leads to extinction. The end.